This is the scariest book that I've ever read. This is the first time I've cried reading a middle grade novel. Aren't all of us morally gray in some way, shape, or form? I was so shocked that I held my breath until my chest started to hurt and I had to remind myself to breathe. I have to reveal that my #1 book of 2022, the best piece of literature that I read all year, is none other than, what up y'all, I am so excited to finally be making this video in which I tell y'all about the 10 best books that I read in 2022. I don't really think that this video needs any preamble, although I will say that the books that are on this list are here mainly because of emotional impact, as well as those really important things like storytelling, writing technique, all of those things that I love to analyze, pacing, all that fun stuff. But the books on this list are not necessarily there because they are literary masterpieces, and I mean, hey, all of them are in my opinion, but they're here because they made an imprint on my soul that is never ever going to change no matter how much time passes. So the first book I'm going to be talking about is none other than None But the Righteous by Chantal James. This, I believe, is a debut, and it was the first book that I read last year, and I went on my Instagram story in early January and said that I was certain I had already found the best book of the year. And this easily could be my #1, but it isn't. However, that does not mean that this book had any less of an impact on me.
I mean, okay, yes.
Quantifiably speaking, it doesn't take the cake. And I get so lonesome for the life of the body that the thinnest slice of it will do. I start answering to names that might not otherwise turn my head. Thirsting for the earthly body, I might even stoop to drink liquor left at a crossroads for hoodoo gods, so happy to be bound up again in the cares of the flesh that I hardly care whose flesh it is. Oh my gosh, so that is the opening paragraph to this book. In None But the Righteous, we are following a spirit who has possessed the body of Ham. Ham is 19 years old, but the spirit that is inside of him, it comes from the 17th century, and he is a man who was like drawn and quartered, and his body was all cut up, and there's only one sliver of the body left, and it's in this necklace that Ham ends up putting on, and that is how the spirit is able to possess Ham's body. And this is just one of the most aggressively well-written books that I have ever read. It is truly haunting. The spiritual representation and depiction is phenomenal. There is a commentary about New Orleans and class, as well as how environmental disasters have impacted the residents of New Orleans, and it is just so incredible. The storytelling techniques, the way that the pages unfold themselves to you as a reader, it is a book that is going to stick with you, that will linger on the tongue, and I cannot wait to re-listen to it in the audio format, because just from the way that the story reads, I have a feeling that that audio delivery is going to be amazing. Don't leave me like my father did. Oh, someone else is here. That's fine. Hello, Jack. Took her place exactly. Wow. It is like 189 pages, so about 200 pages. No, you can't come back. You already abandoned me. It's too late. This is literally what, like, this is the representation of what it's like to have your ex treat you like shit and then leave but come back once somebody else is in your life who doesn't treat you like shit. That's Akasha. #9 on this list is Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. Now, this was one of the books that I had on my list for 5-star predictions that I have to read in 2022 or unhaul them. This has been sitting on my shelves for far too long, and I finally became a Robin Hobb stan in the year of 2022. I read this book, and then I am halfway through the sequel to this book, and it is amazing. Now, I have to say that this book is absolutely worth the hype. I love that this was my first Robin Hobb. I know you're technically supposed to start with Assassin's Apprentice, but I have absolutely no qualms about what I began with, especially because things can be reread. Mad Ship, if you're not familiar about this, wait, this is book 2.
What is wrong with me?
Oh my god, wait, what's book 1 called? Book 1 is The Ship of Magic. Oh, silly me. So in The Ship of Magic, we are following a vibrant cast of characters, one of whom is a pirate on a quest to dominate the world, and the other is different members of this family who own what is called a live ship, and that's basically what, really? A live ship is basically where you have a ship that has been in your family for 3 generations, and 3 generations of leaders of your family have died on board of the ship. And once that happens, the ship quickens and comes to life. And so the figurehead of the ship is able to be sentient and help steer the ship and help in combat and give advice. And she also absorbs the feelings of people on board. So it's very important that death never take place, like murder, gruesome death, those kinds of things, that those things don't take place on her decks, because that can cause the ship to go insane. And there are so many other elements to the story, but in general, I think it's just so good to go into fantasy and thrillers knowing as little as possible, and that is just the best bare bones description that I can give. One of my favorite things about these books is that the characters really go through so much in order to make them develop and grow. The main character, Althea, or one of the main characters, she starts off as a very... Shut up, don't talk to me. She starts off as a very single-minded person. She's like, yes, I deserve to be captain of the ship. And throughout the book, she's kind of realizing things that she may not have realized going in. I don't want to spoil anything, but she is such a different character at the end of this book and well into Mad Ship than she was at book 1, which is fantastic because these books are well over 500 pages each, right? And same thing for Pirate King Kenneth. I just did not care about that man when the book started. And the fact that Robin Hobb was able to take this very mediocre character and make him so interesting says a lot about her, because basically what's boring about him is that he thinks he's the shit, he thinks he's perfect, and that he deserves to be in charge of everything. And those kinds of characters are just so boring, right? The belief that they're great makes them great, and that just usually doesn't work for me. But throughout the books, you come to be like, wow, this guy is really interesting. I'm not saying he should be king of the world, but you get to understand his psychology and his drives and why he is the way that he is, and you notice things about him that you may not have realized already. Sorry, I'm looking at my cactus and she's really sad. Like, look at her. Oh no, and she's getting all hard. I hope she doesn't have a disease. Oh God.
What's wrong with you?
She used to be really soft. I'm wondering if she's getting diseased. Huh. Why do I kill everything that I love? We have another fantasy series, and that is The Final Strife. This was one hell of a debut, and it comes from African and Arabian author Sara Al-Arifi, and I absolutely love this author. I cannot wait for the Battle Drum to be released this year. I am so freaking excited, and the fact that I was so geeked about this book and that it exceeded my expectations so astronomically really says a lot, because those expectations were higher than a white boy at Woodstock. In this book, we get to follow 3 incredible protagonists. We have Scylla, who is this ex-resistance fighter, and she still gets into all of these brawls. She is hardcore. She is not afraid to smash in faces and take names, ask questions later, or maybe not at all. Scylla's a very interesting character. We are also following Hassa, who is of the lowest caste in the society. She is what's called a ghoster or ghostling, ghost something, and basically because of that, their blood runs clear. And unfortunately, they had a failed uprising years ago, and as a result of that, everybody born in this caste has to have their tongue cut out, and I believe they have parts of their body forcibly amputated upon birth. I think it's their hands. Can't remember, but it is a very brutal fantasy. And then we are following a girl who lives in the palace. So we are following somebody from basically all areas of the caste system. Within this world, blood has different colors and different properties associated with those who bleed the certain colors that they do. The story is essentially about these very formidable characters going on a mission to overthrow this corrupt empire. And it is wild. There are definitely moments where you can tell that it is a debut, but if you like gruesome, bloody, gory ass fantasy books, look no further. If you like very amazing world building, I mean, it is African Arabian inspired to the max, and it is so incredible. If you love amazing costuming and jewelry and characters that are very witty and have great banter and really good action scenes, the combat scenes are just chef's kiss. Amazing. Do not miss out on this book. So we have As the Wicked Watch by Tamron Hall. If you spent any time on my channel this past year, you will probably have heard me rant about this book. I read it via audio and then I ran to the bookstore to get a physical copy. Actually, no, I think that a subscriber sent this to me. I think actually one of y'all sent this to me and I put it on my wish list, but it is so amazing. It's written by an ex-investigative journalist turned talk show personality, and she talks a lot about the issues of within journalism and how those issues impact Black folks, poor folks, Black girls. And basically in this book we are following a very cutthroat journalist named Jordan Manning, who is willing to step on any toes in order to get the story. And when a Black student turns up dead, murdered in a terrifically, and when a young Black girl turns up dead, murdered in the most gruesome way possible, she decides that she's gonna stop at nothing to bring her killer to justice. And throughout that, she becomes a target herself. Now, this is a book that does not shy away from violence, child death, child murder, issues of missing Black children, violence against women. Those are all content warnings that you're gonna wanna know going into this book. I found that it had very heavy elements of horror. And this is one of those few books that actually made me feel twinges of fear. And you know that that's very hard to do because y'all know that I am not easily scared. I am really, really not easily scared at all. But in terms of a thriller that actually feels like a thriller, not just a mystery, an actual thriller, you are gonna wanna read this. And the racial social commentary is on point. The sexism social commentary is on point. It is the first in a series and it is unmissable. Now, coming in at number 6, we have When the Reckoning Comes by LaTanya McQueen. I knew this book was going to destroy me. I knew it, and that's why I put it off for so freaking long. I could not believe that LaTanya McQueen snatched every single one of my edges in a book that is less than 240 pages. 240 pages, and I was bawled by the time I finished this book. It was absolutely incredible. It was everything. It is potentially the best audiobook I have ever heard of. When I listened to this narrator's voice, I ran to Google and looked her up, and I was like, where else can I follow you to be near your voice? She has the most incredible voice I have ever heard in my life. And I'm not gonna lie, at some points it was a little distracting to listen to her narrate because, like, I was like, ooh, is she single? Like, I'm just saying.
Focus, Jessie, focus, Jessie, focus, Jessie.
When I think about her voice, I just lose all semblance of time and space, and I really hope she's not watching this video. We are following a character named Mira who fled Kipson over a decade ago because of something very horrific that happened in the town that she was implicated in. So she distances herself from that small southern town, cuts herself off from everybody that she has known there, and starts an entire new life. And when her ex-best friend, who is a white woman living in this town, reaches out to her, she is basically forced into going back to this town to go to her ex-best friend's wedding, which is set on a plantation. And so when she gets there, she finds that there's plantation themed drinks and there's slavery reenactments, and they have renovated slave cabins that now have AC and Wi-Fi and have all these like beautiful accoutrements for white people to go and just see what slavery was like. And they also have waiters that are Black who are serving on the plantation, and the plantation house itself is one that has been known for being the scene of several hauntings. And so this is one of those books that is very similar to Get Out, and the atmosphere is terrifying, made even more real by the very incredible way that McQueen narrates the story. This book is absolutely rife with tension. There are confrontational scenes that are absolutely loaded with subtext. There are so many scenes where Mira is dealing with microaggressions that feel so not very micro in their aggression. This is the book that is going to make you feel so many things: horror, fear, anger, frustration, sick, all of those things. And when she goes to the plantation and is confronting Celine, her best friend who's getting married, she also is forced to reconcile with Jesse, who was part of their friendship threesome and now is older, even more attractive than he was back then, but is determined to expose this plantation and its owners for what it truly is. There are so many great conversations that take place within this book about ways to handle and cope with racism. There are some of us who just want to run from it and not think about it and to just try and think positively, and then there are others of us who just can't let these things go. And you get to see so many different types of perspectives in this book. I really loved it. I can't recommend it enough. Now, I will say that the ending of this book is one of the most disappointing things ever, because I think that it didn't capitalize on something that it was building up to. But even with that, I still enjoyed the ride so much that I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akata Woman. Now, y'all are probably going to be surprised that this isn't #1, and I said, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, that I was going to stop making Akata Woman's books my #1 picks of the year, because y'all know that they are my favorite author. And I felt like it was just getting so boring that every single year I was like, and this new release, Akata Woman is my favorite author. So now they are no longer allowed to be my favorite book, because nothing would ever change. Although it's funny, because this is the first year that Akata is not going to be releasing a book, like the first year in I think 6 years. So I'm excited to see what my top 10 looks like in 2023. But y'all know this book, it was absolutely everywhere. We are following a young girl named Feiyi who is grieving the loss of her fiance. Feiyi is an amazingly talented artist, and when she decides to start dating again, to get back out there, she is invited to go to this famous chef's private little home. And by home, I mean luxurious mansion on an island. And she's invited to go there by his son, who has got a thing for her. But sure enough, once she gets to the island, once she meets Daddy, once she sets her sight upon old Gramps, sparks fly. And so this is a forbidden romance between Feiyi and the guy that likes hers father. It's intense, it is very messy, it is going to be a book that I think is going to challenge a lot of romance readers, and there were a lot of people who really didn't like this book. Some of the things that I loved was the complex grief representation. I loved the unapologetic Black woman-ness of this book. I loved the depiction of Black female friendships and queer Black womanhood. I loved the bisexual depiction, the fluidity of this book. Her love interest is a very fluid man, and I love seeing representation for Black men that are comfortable experimenting with aspects of their femininity or with makeup or whatever term that you want to use, or lack of terms, for getting to play with one's self-expression and presentation. I just absolutely loved that. I loved the representation for instant spiritual bonding, which isn't something that I get to see a whole lot in books that you see in Barnes & Noble, for example. There's so much that I loved about this book. Personally, I love the romance. I ship Feiyi and Alim. I think his name is Alim. I ship Feiyi and Alim so hard. Anybody who ships Feiyi and Nasir, I have questions for, and the questions all start with why. But no matter where you fall on this book, no matter who you end up shipping, I think that it is going to be a ride regardless. One of the most fun, inventive romances that I've ever read, and you just shouldn't sleep on it. Coming in at #4, we have none other than Here Comes the Sun by Nicole Dennis Benn. This is a book that you probably will have seen, and it is one that I promise is worth the hype. I think one of the reasons why I put this book off, despite the fact that I loved Patsy, was because I was like, there's no way it's gonna live up to Patsy, and there's no way it can possibly be as good as everybody says so. But now that I've read Here Comes the Sun, I do understand why so many people were disappointed by Patsy. I think that they were expecting Here Comes the Sun 2.0, and that's definitely not what Patsy was. But let's talk about this book. Now, you cannot talk about moral gray characters without talking about Here Comes the Sun. And it makes me so sad when I keep seeing these moral gray book recommendations. and Nicole Dennis Benn's characters aren't on that list, because she, in my opinion, is the absolute queen of writing a character that is a real freaking person. Aren't all of us morally gray in some way, shape, or form? Nobody can bring characters to life the way that Nicole Dennis Benn does. She is a master of words, and the things that she is able to do with English just blows my freaking mind. Let me just tell you what Here Comes the Sun is about, and while I'm doing that, I just need you to open Goodreads and just click add to TBR, click add to cart, do whatever you have to do, but you have to read this book. So basically, we are following 3 women throughout this story, one of whom, her name is Margot. She is a manager at this hotel, this luxury resort, basically for wealthy white people to come.
I'm explaining this really bad.
One of the characters that we get to follow is named Margot, who works the front desk at this opulent resort in Montego Bay. And she is so tired of being passed over for promotions and is exhausted from not getting anywhere further on in this company that she's given her whole life to. And so she decides to start running a brothel out of the hotel, and she hires sex workers, and she is literally running a sex working operation outside of this resort. And she is doing this in order to put her younger sister Thandi through college because she wants her to be a doctor. Meanwhile, Thandi does not want to be a doctor, she wants to be an artist. And meanwhile, Margot doesn't want to be doing any of this. She is secretly in love with a woman, she is a lesbian, and that woman is the only thing that really makes her happy, but this is not a place where she is able to be her queer self, and there's a lot of self-hate there. And you also get to follow the perspective of both of these girls' mother, who is very, very abusive and one hell of a morally gray character herself. And if you want to read one of the most devastating, frustrating, beautiful, poignant, but exciting books that you've ever read, you have to read this. It talks so much about tourism and what tourism does to Jamaica. It talks so much about intergenerational trauma, specifically with women, and the way that women pass their traumas on to their daughters, especially through toxic patterns of behavior that then get imprinted on those girls, and what it means when you don't work through your shit, and what that means for your family. There is just so much that I can say about this book, and if you can see how heavily I tabbed it, I mean, I feel like this just says it all. At any point in time, I can open this book and find an absolute banger of a line. Oh my god, it's so good. It's just so frustrating because it's so good. Coming in at number 3 on this list, we have The Healer of the Water Monster. I believe this is by Brian Young. I cannot find my copy anywhere. As I sat down to film, it just vanished into thin air, and I'm so devastated by it. But I cannot wait to talk to you about this book because it is one of the most under-celebrated books that I've ever heard of in my entire life. And honestly, the best way that I can review this book is just by talking about some of the notes that I have highlighted on my phone, because I read it via audio, which is absolutely the way to go if you're able to access audiobooks. And the audio narration, I cried. This is the first time I've cried reading a middle grade novel in quite a long time. The narrator is the author, and he did an amazing job, and the afterword at the end of the book really contextualizes the story, and I want everybody to read it. Even the afterword is worth reading on its own. It is just absolutely amazing. So before I tell you my thoughts, I want to talk a little bit about what Healer of the Water Monster is about. We're following this, I believe, 10-year-old boy whose name is Nathan, and he comes to stay with his grandmother for the summer and is working on the summer project, and he ends up meeting a water monster, and this water monster is dying, and so he goes on a quest to bring the water monster back to health. So some of the notes that I've made about Water Monster is that it deals with grief and depression and child suicidality, so content warnings for all of that, mental health and alcoholism in Navajo populations, and PTSD from Navajo soldiers being enlisted. It talks a lot about spiritual and medical health because he needs to walk both paths in order to get to wellness. I also really love that we have Nathan, who is a non-thin protagonist, and I think it's so important to have books where we get to see kids celebrating their bodies. There's a scene where Nathan is really trying to hold it together and isn't able to cry until he's surrounded by both his grandmother and his father, and it was so beautiful to see a brown boy be allowed to feel, and he just was one of the most real characters that I've ever felt in my life, and it just honestly was such a privilege to get to know him. It talks a lot about mythology and spiritual realism. It's amazing. I love all of the lore that's in it, and I loved how you feel absolutely every single thing that these characters are going through. You feel it all. Like, this is a book that is going to hit heavily. I love also that parents were involved in the story, because that's often my complaint in YA and middle grade books, is parents are just absolutely absent. The storytelling was phenomenal. I've already told you that the audiobook is incredible, and it talks a lot about poisoning of indigenous land. So this is a book that I want literally everybody to read. That's all I have to say. I have to switch over my battery before I talk about my top 2 favorite books of 2022. Before I talk about the top 2 books of 2022 for me personally, I have to give a big shout out to The Hollow Kind by, I think, Anthony Davidson. This is a book that I have a 45-minute dedicated reading vlog to, and I honestly just forgot all about including it in this list, and I just don't have time to rework it, so I'm gonna put it here as an honorable mention. This is the scariest book that I've ever read, and if you watch the video you will see why it scared me so deeply. It chills me to my core to think about, which is why it has to be on this list, and also this is officially an auto-buy author for me. Coming in at number 2 on my best books of 2022 is none other than Akata Woman by Dr. Nnedi Okorafor. This is the 3rd book in the Insipidity Scripts series, which is still ongoing, and in this book Sunny and her friends are older, and they are even more powerful than you could imagine. I have loved this series so deeply, and if you're not familiar with the series, it is set in Nigeria, and we are following an albino girl. I think we start following her at age 12, named Sunny, and she finds out that she is a witch, and her albinism allows her to turn invisible, and she has just incredible abilities. I don't want to spoil anything, but her abilities are amazing, and she starts attending this Nigerian academy for witches with her friends, and she and her friends go on these incredible epic journeys, and the issues that are talked about in these books are amazing. The inclusion of different types of Black experiences of disabled bodies are absolutely incredible. The author is a disabled Nigerian American woman, and the way that she writes is unmatched. Nnedi Okorafor's world building and the way that she pulls African spiritualities into her world building, the way that she pulls off of lore and mythos is nothing short of mastery. For me, this is less of a fantasy story and more of a spiritual realism trilogy. Well, it's not a trilogy, I'm sorry. I keep wanting to call it a trilogy because we're on book 3, but the series is ongoing. It is truly incredible, and this book made me cry. There is a revelation about Sunny at the end of this book. I think I held my breath for a full minute. I was so shocked that I held my breath until my chest started to hurt and I had to remind myself to breathe. I literally had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Okorafor, and before the interview, I was like shouting at her. I was like, how could you do this to me? In a good way, in a good way. It was such an amazing revelation. She is so amazing, and I love Sunny's relationship with her spirit self. The depiction of spirit self, I just can't. I just think that this is a book series that you cannot miss, and specifically Akata Woman. This is a book that you cannot miss. I highly recommend the audiobooks. They are fantastic. Now it is time for me to talk about my #1 book of the year. I would love for you to pause this video and comment down below with what book you think that is. If you have spent significant time on my channel over the last few months, I think you're probably gonna know. But without further delay, I have to reveal that my #1 book of 2022, the best piece of literature that I read all year, is none other than Babel by R.F. Kuang. I don't think that this is gonna surprise anybody. I have 4 copies of this book. I still am planning on posting one of my annotated copies on my Pango account, my online bookstore, which there's a $5 credit link down below if any of you want to shop my online bookstore, but I just haven't done it yet. I am on the bandwagon. What can I say? If you saw me earlier in the year, I was sobbing. So this was a Patreon book club pick, so I did a spoiler-filled reading vlog exclusively for my patrons. And in the vlog, I was sobbing. Yay! I've waited my entire life for this moment. I'm so happy. It's just a lot. I'm just so sad. I was destroyed, distraught. I don't even know how to explain what this book did to me. I was utterly devastated, and specifically by the ending. The ending that we all knew was coming, but it didn't change the fact that it was devastating once we got there, whether you had been warned or not. It really didn't matter. And of course, this is a dark academic tale about this boy named Robin who is taken from his home in China, and he is taken to Oxford, where he learns how to work with silver. And in this world, silver has various different properties, many of which are magical properties, and he gets the privilege of working with silver and meets these friends, and these friends change him for a lifetime. And so it's about the situation that he and his friends find themselves in and how they get themselves out of it. Honestly, this book is one of those books that has a great fantastical background. It has a fantastical setting, but it feels otherwise like a non-fantasy story. So I feel like this is a really good book for those of you who enjoy fantasy, but you get kind of overwhelmed by a heavy fantastical story. If you like a story with good fantastical elements, Babel is very likely going to be the one for you. I found that R.F. Kuang used this setting very expertly as a way to explore colonialism and complicitness within that system. And she did this primarily through one character whose name is Letty, and I think that Letty is now my most hated character of all time, even though, you know, it's fine. Also, let me know if you want to see me do a video where I talk about my most hated characters of all time. But I don't know what to say about Babel that hasn't already been said, because everything that I have to say is definitely going to be a parrot of all of the other amazing things that you've heard about this. If I had something new to talk about, I would, but I just can't help the fact that this book made me so emotional, and I really felt for what it means to have your tongue taken from you, and what it means to be forced to participate in systems that you don't want to participate in, but you don't know what other option that you have is, especially when the other option is death. And it's just, there's so much about this book that I unpack honestly in that vlog, because it's hard for me to talk publicly about what this book means to me since it's so private. So if you are interested in the vlog with all of my conflicted thoughts, check out my Patreon. That is going to be linked down below. I've also added a $1 tier to my Patreon, so if you want to check that out and get the ability to vote on an upcoming video every month, definitely now is the time to do so. That is it, folks. Those are the 10 best books that I read in 2022. What were your favorite books of 2022? Give me your top 2. I want to hear your top 2. Also, let me know if any of these books are ones that I put on your radar, or if I convinced you to read any of them. But that is gonna do it for me. Don't forget about Blackathon. It is going to begin on February 1st. So by the time this video gets up, it may or may not already be underway. That announcement video is linked down below. It is not too late to join in on the Blackathon fun. Until next time, stay safe, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and I can't wait to see you in my next video. Say goodbye to Akasha. Akasha. I love you.